Have you ever contemplated why we constantly reiterate the exact behaviors that wound us, as though an unperceived hand within was silently piloting our journey? Why do we long for specifically what will drag us under, even when we are fully aware of the toll we must endure? Jung never viewed dependency as a lack of strength. He perceived it as a signal, a misplaced fragment of the spirit that has been overlooked, attempting to rediscover its path home. It manifests as quietly as a gentle breeze, concealing itself behind routine habits. The cigarette you ignite without awareness, the instinctive scrolling on your device, the glass you replenish when your internal world feels hollow.
Addiction masquerades as pleasure, but beneath the exterior resides a suffering buried so deep you can no longer recall its origin. And perhaps that is precisely the reason you are attending to these words. Not to engage in self-combat, but to, for the very first time, observe the place you have habitually avoided. So what is truly governing you? The craving itself, or the revelation behind it? Is dependency destroying your life, or is it striving to articulate something you have never had the courage to acknowledge? Remain with us, for you will eventually comprehend why addiction has never truly been the entity in control, but merely the key to the specific doorway you have always been terrified to approach. Part 1. Dependency does not start with a shout, but with a murmur.
Addiction doesn't commence with a scream, but with a whisper. Dependency does not manifest like a sudden gale. It does not shatter your existence in a solitary moment. It glides into your life much more subtly than that. It drifts into your world on muted footsteps, as if it had been an acquaintance for a vast duration. Jung formerly noted that the subconscious always communicates in metaphors, in vague hints, in delicate vibrations that the conscious intellect is not refined enough to grasp. Dependency is one of those hints. It does not bellow, "I am here to dominate you." It merely taps softly on your shoulder at the exact instance your spirit is at its most fragile state. The initial habit never resembles an addiction.
It appears as a minor prize, a fleeting comfort, a cigarette during a high-pressure work hour, a rapid glance at the screen when your mind is in turmoil, a beverage at night when you feel as though you have no one left to confide in. Minor gestures, light as specks of dust. But it is that dust which accumulates into a dense shroud, blurring the mirror that reflects your spirit. What is distinct about dependency is not the action itself, but the manner in which it infiltrates the fractures of the psyche. Individuals like to assume they will readily detect what is ruining them, but the subconscious does not function in that manner. According to Jung, whatever we exclude from our awareness will discover a route back through the most intricate channels. Addiction is one of those routes. A skewed version of self-regulation emerging from the shadowy realm where suffering has gone dormant. And because it is so discreet, it commences with a murmur. Phrases you never voice aloud, yet they exist beneath the surface of your logic. Just this once. I am so weary. I am entitled to a brief respite. It is all right. Tomorrow will be different. These are not sentences you deliberately construct. They are not the voice of intellect. They are reverberations from a deeper layer of your being, the region Jung termed the shadow. And the shadow is extraordinarily patient. It does not dispute. It does not compel. It simply lingers for the perfect moment to lean in and murmur into your ear. The cleverness of addiction resides in the fact that it denies you the opportunity to pose questions.
It does not present as a complication. It presents as a remedy. It arrives as a companion, a temporary sanctuary, an umbrella in a deluge of feelings you do not know how to confront. It pacifies, it suggests, it consoles, and that is precisely what makes it hazardous. Jung once observed that every endeavor to bypass suffering will return as a vulnerability, and addiction is the type of vulnerability we fail to identify. You assume you desire nicotine, but in reality, you desire 5 seconds where you do not have to confront your anxiety. You assume you desire alcohol, but in truth, you want to stifle the internal critic in your mind. You assume you desire the luminous screen, but in fact, You are merely terrified of the internal gloom drawing nearer. Jung once remarked, "People will do anything, no matter how irrational, to avoid facing their own souls." The initial dependency is not the deed you carry out. It is the instance you refuse to coexist with the emotion that is arriving. A minor, restless feeling, like a trace of grief, agitation, emptiness, or even just a passing sense of void. But every escape carries a toll. The cost of addiction is not in the habit itself, but in the manner you progressively lose the capacity to attend to yourself. Each time you allow dependency to occupy the void, you lose a bit more intimacy with your internal landscape. Every time you prioritize numbness over sensation, the gloom intensifies. What is remarkable is that very few individuals ever detect that murmur.
They only perceive the shout of the consequences. They only observe addiction when it has already claimed too much territory. But Jung consistently maintained that if we decelerate sufficiently, becoming sensitive enough to attend to the initial cues, we will not have to wait until life strikes us violently to awaken us. Dependency has never opened with a breakdown. It always commences with a sensation so slight you assume it is benign. But from that specific seed, the entire narrative of your life is altered. And if you wish to reclaim that narrative, you must return to the origin where the dependency began, to the murmur. Not to battle it, but to finally comprehend what it is striving to communicate. Part 2. Why is stopping so difficult?
So you must be questioning, if I am aware it ruins me this much, why is it impossible to stop? Jung provided a cold but accurate reply. Because you have never truly engaged in dialogue with the entity standing behind the dependency. You are merely grappling with its silhouette. Individuals do not fail because they lack resolve. Individuals fail because they are fighting something they do not comprehend. It is like observing a silhouette on the wall and swinging forcefully to strike it, and yet the silhouette never vanishes. Not because it is resilient, but because your strike has never connected with the one projecting the shadow. Addiction is the same. You strike at the habit, but the origin resides elsewhere, and this misdirection is precisely why you consistently fail.
Another reason we cannot halt is that the human intellect cannot abide a vacuum. The greater the void, the more the subconscious assumes control. Envision resolve as a taut cord. You can pull it, but if you pull for too long, it fractures. Addiction surfaces at the exact moment the cord begins to diminish. For instance, you resolve to abandon your phone, but after only one grueling day, one solitary dusk, one thought that makes your heart sink, you access the screen once more. At that juncture, the phone is no longer merely a tool. It has become a psychological support. Jung once stated that nothing in the subconscious disappears simply because you want it absent. On the contrary, what is suppressed will return in a far more potent form.
This is precisely why trying to coerce yourself to halt often fails. The more you clench the reins, the harder the subconscious tugs to remind you that the true problem is unresolved. You observe yourself failing and feel worthless when, in fact, it is merely a psychological principle. Anything discarded will find a route back. Observe real-world scenarios. A work addict does not persist because they adore stress, but because if they halt, the void rushes in. Someone who cannot release the drink does not grasp it because they enjoy being intoxicated, but because when they are sober, the internal voices are too loud. We do not pursue dependency because we wish to ruin ourselves. We pursue it because it is our alibi to avoid looking at something even more daunting.
If a segment of this narrative resonates with you sufficiently to cause a momentary pause, jot down a brief sentence beneath, not to inform me, but to acknowledge the moment you finally recognized something you have been evading for a long duration. According to Jung, dependency exists because it serves a purpose. It protects you from a feeling you believe you cannot endure. That conviction is what imprisons you. You say, "I can't stop," but your subconscious says, if we stop, we will have to feel what we suppressed all these decades. And between those two options, you select addiction, even knowing the pain. In contemporary psychology, there is a term called misdirected soothing. It signifies the addictive habit is trying to dull your suffering in precisely the wrong manner.
You feel isolated, so you scroll. You scroll, so you feel more isolated. The isolation expands, so you scroll again. This vortex is not fueled by the habit's strength, but by a root suffering that has never been touched. To break the vortex, you must see the hand that is revolving it, but most individuals only observe the surface. So we cannot stop not because we lack grit, but because addiction is a long-standing protective structure of the soul. It has been present so long that the body believes it requires it for survival. You are not battling a mere routine. You are battling a survival mechanism. And survival mechanisms always prevail until we transform the reason they came into being.
That is also why Jung never advised trying to be stronger. He said, observe what makes you weak, because once the root is identified, the old structure vanishes on its own. When pain is addressed by its legitimate name, addiction loses its purpose, and consequently, its power to dominate. Now you comprehend why you have been failing. But in the subsequent part, you will grasp something even more vital. Dependency has never been the adversary. It is a sign, a cipher, a message in disguise. And once you decode it, the narrative transforms entirely. Are you prepared to enter that section? Part 3. Addiction is a masquerade.
And once you comprehend why we cannot halt, you will perceive a deeper, more distressing, yet more liberating fact. Dependency has never been the primary source of harm. It is merely the mask. What resides behind it is what we have neglected for much too long. Jung maintained that every recurring habit, every uncontrollable urge, is a disguise concealing a portion of the spirit that has been forsaken. Dependency only plays a minor role. The lead character is the isolation that has never been labeled, the terror that has never been addressed, or an inner child that has been abandoned for years without our recognition. When Jung discussed the shadow, many assumed it was the malevolent part of themselves. In truth, it is not. The gloom does not only contain errors. It contains the forgotten pieces, the rejected portions, the parts branded with the label forbidden to exist. And when they are pushed too deep, they must find an alternative way to articulate themselves. Addiction is the simplest method for that part to breathe. You are not hooked on nicotine. You are hooked on those few seconds of relief that the damaged child within you never experienced. You are not hooked on social media. You are hooked on the brief interval in which you do not have to confront the feeling of inadequacy that you have been concealing your entire life. Observe a common example that few truly perceive. Someone who constantly claims they are addicted to productivity. Others applaud them, viewing it as a mark of drive or talent.
But from Jung's lens, behind that mask often lurks a child who once felt invisible, a child who was not acknowledged, not validated. When they mature, they search for a safe method to be noticed. Career becomes a prestigious disguise. Everyone assumes they are enthusiastic. Only the subconscious knows they are desperately craving the look of validation they never obtained in youth. Others are addicted to pursuing people who cannot return their affection. Every time they are wounded, they criticize their heart. But Jung would inquire, if you truly believed you were worthy of devotion, why do you continue selecting those who are incapable of giving it? When we search deeper, there is often a part forsaken in the past, a child who had to exert so much effort just to be observed.
So in maturity, they subconsciously recreate that familiar sensation, hooked on fragile hope, hooked on the pursuit, because that is the only emotional language they understand. Addiction, in Jung's perspective, is a low-quality replacement for a lost bond, a genuine bond between us and ourselves. It conceals a rupture, the rupture between the individual you are performing as and the portion of your spirit you abandoned. And this truth alters the entire outlook. We are not intended to battle dependency. We are intended to identify who dependency is sheltering. These disguises are so subtle that we confuse them for our authentic identity.
A hostile person tells themselves, "That's just my nature." Someone who avoids intimacy thinks, "I'm just not talented at expressing feelings." Someone hooked on control assumes this is what resilience looks like. But from Jung's viewpoint, all of these might merely be different facades of a wound that has never been addressed. For instance, a hostile person may have matured in an unsafe setting where only rage could shield them. As an adult, rage becomes a potent mask, while underneath resides a gentle heart that the person has never dared to observe. And this is what Jung highlighted. The subconscious never emits random signs. When a habit becomes a dependency, it means the forsaken part has reached the point where it can no longer stay quiet. It needs to be identified.
It needs to be brought into the light. And this is why we must perceive addiction as a mask. It does not articulate the truth. It only articulates what the conscious mind can endure. The truth always resides deeper, in the locations you least expect. What truly wounds us is not the addiction. What wounds us is our lack of mercy for the forsaken part within. We penalize it, we loathe it, we label it weak, we call it a burden. But that specific attitude of exclusion is what compels the mask to grow denser. The more the damaged part is suppressed, the more dependency must arise to exist. No mask is created from pure malevolence. It is created from the isolation of a part of the spirit we once ignored. And this is the query Jung always wanted each individual to pose to themselves. If addiction is a mask, then what authentic face does it want you to see? Once that query is posed, the struggle with dependency is no longer a struggle. It becomes a process of decoding, a process of unmasking, a process of bringing the forsaken part back home. And that is exactly where you are traveling. When you observe addiction, not with loathing, but with inquiry and mercy, the mask commences to crack. Underneath, you will encounter what you dread the most, but also what you require the most to become who you truly are. We will proceed deeper into that in the subsequent part, where dependency is no longer the adversary, but a message encrypted by your own spirit. Are you prepared to observe it? Part 4. Recurring ceremonies, the internal drama.
Part 4. Repeated rituals, the subconscious play. When the mask is removed, you will realize something startling. Addiction never surfaces randomly. It possesses structure. It possesses a beat. It possesses a sequence like an ancient ceremony you carry out every day without noticing. And that is when we enter the subsequent truth Jung tried to illustrate. Dependency functions like a play performed in the subconscious, iterating itself according to a script you have never read, yet know by heart. It is this iteration that provides us with a sense of comfort, even though we despise it. That comfort is the unperceived chain. Observe closely. Individuals hooked on tobacco do not smoke at any arbitrary time. They smoke at specific, defined moments. Individuals hooked on social media do not scroll aimlessly at all hours. They scroll at specific psychological intervals. Individuals hooked on the sensation of being desired do not fall for just anyone. They are always attracted to the same category of person. Every addictive habit has its own recurring ceremony, the hour of day, the setting, the emotion, the location in space, even the alignment of the body. The subconscious is the director, and you, without realizing it, are the primary performer. Jung maintained that every recurring ceremony carries a hint of something ancient, a type of collective subconscious that mankind has carried for eras. Ceremonies were designed to link people with the sacred, but when injury and trauma enter, ceremonies become warped. So each time dependency flares, you are not merely repeating an act, you are reenacting a sliver of memory, a pattern of feeling from the past that you are unaware you are still carrying. Envision a typical evening. All day long you seem fine, but when dusk falls, the silence commences to grow more burdensome. Then, at a specific hour, you open the refrigerator. Not because you are famished, but because your body is accustomed to the ceremony of eating to saturate the void at that time. That iteration is not arbitrary. It is carved in the subconscious from those years when there was no one to soothe you, and food became the only method to dull the terror of being forsaken. Today, you are no longer that youngster, but the ceremony remains precisely identical.
Or another instance, people who instinctively reach for their phone the moment they enter a room solitary. No alerts, no specific reason, just a basic feeling of, there is no one here with me,
is sufficient to trigger the familiar ceremony. For them, the phone is not just a gadget, it is a protective charm that helps them flee the rawest instance of all, the instance of being solitary with themselves. That instance is the stage on which the subconscious articulates, and they will do anything to pull the curtain shut. Contemporary psychology labels this the loop of trigger habit relief, but Jung peered deeper. He observed that the ceremony of addiction is not about generating joy, it is about restoring a damaged psychological equilibrium.
Like an old drama in which every scene was scripted to keep you surviving in the past, even though it no longer suits the present, you cannot halt because the ceremony creates a sensation of security. That casing does not help you evolve, but it does prevent you from plummeting into the internal abyss, and the subconscious believes it is preferable to stay in a familiar jail than to move into a new territory it cannot anticipate. The more a ceremony is iterated, the more the subconscious believes this is the correct path. This is why actions that wound you can still feel strangely appropriate. Not appropriate to logic, but appropriate to the old internal blueprint. Jung once wrote that the human spirit is always striving to finish what is incomplete.
The ceremony of addiction is a warped attempt to resolve that incomplete business. With every iteration, the subconscious hopes that this time it will be acknowledged, this time the injury will be observed. But everything transpires unconsciously. The injury is never addressed. The ceremony persists. If you have ever inquired of yourself, why do I always do this at precisely this instance? The reply is clear. The ceremony does not select at random. It selects the exact instance when your spirit is most vulnerable, because that is where memories and feelings once fractured. One vital point Jung consistently stressed is this: the ceremony of addiction is not something you must destroy. It is something you must observe directly.
When you analyze the framework of a ceremony, you begin to perceive what it has been trying to veil. You begin to realize that you are not hooked on the deed itself. You are hooked on the comfort of an unaddressed wound. From the instance you truly perceive this, the ceremony commences to falter. The subconscious string that has been pulling you into the cycle starts to slacken, not because you compel it, but because you finally perceive why it exists. Thank you for walking with me halfway through this expedition. Not everyone possesses the grit to strip back the layers of their own subconscious, so the fact that you are still present already reveals a great deal. The sections to come will go even deeper, revealing corners you may never have had the courage to touch.
So if you feel that this cadence is speaking directly to something within you, remain until the finish. And if you desire more content like this to reach you more easily, you already know what to do. A like, a subscription, minor acts perhaps, but sometimes it is precisely the smallest acts that unlock a door we never anticipated. Part 5. The Turning Point. Translating addiction into dialogue.
Once you have observed the framework of the ceremony, you will notice something even more vital. Dependency is always striving to articulate something, not in vocabulary, but in deeds. And this is the turning point that most individuals never reach. What must be done is not to stifle the message, but to decode it. Transitioning from combat to listening is not a sign of weakness, it is psychological maturity. When you observe addiction through the lens of an observer instead of a runaway, you begin to see what you could not see previously. Every addictive event carries data. It is not aimless repetition. It is a map leading to the segment of you that has been detached. And just by altering your perspective slightly, dependency immediately alters its appearance.
Jung remarked, "Symptoms are endeavors at self-healing. Psychological indicators, including dependency, are not errors. They are endeavors at healing that are being misread." When we cease viewing addiction as the adversary, we finally perceive what it has been striving to mend. This is why attempting to halt rarely functions. You cannot mute the courier just because you dislike the manner in which the news is being delivered. What you must inquire is, what are you trying to inform me? So how do we translate dependency into language? The reply is simpler than you assume. By generating a gap where all subconscious ceremonies run on autopilot, you insert 1 second of mindfulness. Just 1 second is sufficient to transform the entire framework.
That second is the entry through which the message can emerge. Envision this. You are reaching for a cigarette. In that moment,
Instead of forcing yourself to stop with willpower, you pose a query. What sensation appeared right before my limb moved? That query transforms the habit into a clue. You are no longer merely a performer in the ceremony, you become its translator. For instance, you realize that every time the feeling of being evaluated surfaces, you crave nicotine. What does that indicate? That cigarettes are not the authentic issue. The issue is that you carry within you a terror of being diminished, perhaps an echo from youth. Or you realize that whenever quietness settles in, you automatically grasp your phone. That does not signify you are addicted to tech. It signifies you have never felt safe being solitary with your own intellect. The urge itself is the language, and once you can interpret it, dependency loses its grip over you. Jung stated, "The subconscious does not know how to speak in prose. It speaks in symbols. Dependency is a living symbol." How do you interpret a symbol? By observing without critique. When you pause not to fight the urge, but to inquire, what am I fleeing from? The entire framework of addiction commences to unfold. The more you truly observe it, the more fragile it becomes, like gloom that only seems daunting when it has not been lit. Once light contacts it, there is nothing left for it to inhabit. The most vital thing is this: we do not transform dependency into the adversary, we transform it into the courier.
Seen this way, you can bring dependency into dialogue. Jung considered this one of the most vital steps in recovery, bringing the subconscious into the light through internal dialogue. In execution, this is very tangible. Whenever a craving surfaces, you pose 3 queries. What sensation is this concealing? What does that sensation want me to acknowledge? If I did not use dependency to bypass it, what would I hear? Just doing this a few times, you will observe the craving begin to decelerate. Not because it suddenly becomes fragile, but because you have started to comprehend it. You are no longer its prey. You are the one attending. And something magnificent transpires when you attend. Addiction transforms into a map. You see the root of your suffering.
You comprehend the old defense tactic. You identify the forsaken part behind it. In that instance, dependency is no longer a jail. It becomes the key that unlocks the door inward. Part 6. Recent ceremonies to aid reconnecting the self. Part 6. New rituals to help reintegrate the self. At this juncture, what you must do is not suppress it, but substitute the old ceremony with a new one. A ritual does not vanish simply because you desire it to. It only vanishes when another ceremony with deeper significance assumes its place. This is the instance you begin to enter what Jung termed reintegration. After comprehending the message of the subconscious, you must construct new entryways through which the forsaken part can return without needing to assume the shape of dependency.
What is important is that these new ceremonies do not emerge from coercion or cold logic. They must emerge from willingness, presence, and reverence for the deepest part of you. Start with the most basic thing, generating a deliberate gap. Each time a craving arises, instead of lunging into the old habit, you pause for 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds are sufficient to commence altering the entire framework. In those 3 seconds, you place a palm on your chest, or simply inhale slowly through your nostrils and exhale slowly through your mouth. The breath is the most profound reconnection ceremony we possess. It is the solitary thread that bridges consciousness and the subconscious in real time. A single inhalation can do what resolve cannot. Decelerate you just enough for you to hear the authentic voice beneath the urge. When you generate that gap, you achieve the one thing dependency dreads most. You reclaim agency. After the gap, you move to the second ceremony, posing queries. Not complex philosophical queries, but tender ones, like conversing with a frightened youngster. What are you terrified of? What is hurting you? What do you require from me right now? These queries are not intended for logical dissection. Their only goal is to open the door to sincerity, because only when the forsaken part is invited into dialogue does it no longer require dependency to survive. you will be amazed how just one query can diminish a craving.
Not because you suddenly became more powerful, but because the subconscious finally feels acknowledged in its own tongue. Note, the subsequent ceremony involves writing, and writing is not to document thoughts, but to create a mirror for the subconscious. Every night before retiring, instead of seizing your phone, you allow yourself exactly 2 minutes to record a single query. What did I lose today? This query is not about failure. It identifies the moments you wandered away from yourself. Every time you scrolled mindlessly, tried too hard to satisfy others, laughed when you were not truly joyful, remained quiet when you wanted to speak. All of those are instances you lost yourself. Recording this query every night helps you see one thing clearly. Addiction is not the core issue.
Disconnection is. And this writing ceremony is how you pull yourself back to your core. Another ceremony Jung highly esteemed is what we could term the grounding ceremony. Many addictive urges surge up when the intellect loses its anchor. When you are agitated, you are ejected from your body and imprisoned in your thoughts. Jung termed this a state of being detached from the self. In that instance, instead of reaching for your dependency, you can lie down on the floor for 2 minutes, shut your eyes, and feel your body in contact with the ground. This is an ancient habit found in many traditions because it returns the mind into the body, calming internal turbulence.
Those who experiment with this often notice that simply feeling their body grow dense against the floor drains the intensity out of the craving, not because the urge vanishes, but because the intellect has returned home, the body. There is another ceremony for those moments when isolation creeps in. Isolation is one of the deepest origins of addiction. Jung said, "Loneliness is not the lack of people, but the lack of connection with the living part inside us." So instead of reaching for food, chemicals, or screens, try this. Take a pen and paper and write a message to your younger self, perhaps at 10, 14, or 17, whichever age feels most forsaken. Write as if you were cradling that child in your arms. It can be brief.
This ceremony helps you bring the forsaken part back to where it belongs, inside, instead of letting it manifest as dependency. Finally, there is a ceremony Jung saw as the greatest entryway to transformation, the ceremony of telling yourself the truth. Each time you are about to fall into an addictive habit, state out loud, even if only as a whisper, "I want to do this because I am in pain." This sentence is not intended to make you feel remorseful or dominated. Its goal is to cast light into the gloom. When you name the truth, the old ceremony loses its authority instantly. No gloom can endure under an honest stare. And truth possesses a specific kind of power. It makes you free without you having to compel it. These new ceremonies are not gimmicks to cure addiction.
They are bridges conducting you back to your authentic self. Once the bond is restored, dependency has nothing left to achieve. It departs on its own, like a visitor whose mission is finished. In the subsequent part, we will reach the summit of Jung's expedition, transformation, where you not only comprehend addiction, not only dialogue with it, but also convert the raw energy of urge into life force. Are you prepared to enter that section? Before we proceed to transformation, I have a very minor challenge for you tonight. Right before you sleep, select one new ceremony from what I have just shared, just one, and perform it for exactly 2 minutes. Then tomorrow, if you truly feel that it moved something inside you, return here and inform us how those 2 minutes impacted you. And when the new ceremonies begin to help you reattach the thread back to yourself, the authentic expedition Jung wanted us to traverse finally commences. Jung labeled it the process of individuation, the expedition in which you cease living as the shadow of your wound and commence becoming the master of your own spirit. This is not an expedition toward perfection, it is an expedition toward truth. Individuation commences when the fragments return and you exit the role of a captive led by the subconscious and enter the role of a master who knows where you are headed and why.
Jung once stated that human beings were not designed to be flawless, we were designed to be whole. Wholeness signifies having space for everything, strength and fragility, precision and chaos.
the parts you are satisfied with, and the parts you once suppressed out of embarrassment. Dependency arises because a portion of you has been excluded from that circle for too long. But as the new ceremonies bring that part home, you begin to see clearly that you are not a collection of fragmented pieces. You are a totality waiting to be merged. The expedition of individuation is the journey in which you assume the role of master, not warden. The warden compels, regulates, and penalizes. The master comprehends, directs, and guides from within.
When you still perceive dependency as a villain that must be annihilated, you are living as a prisoner of yourself. But when you begin attending, dialoguing, reintegrating, and constructing new ceremonies, you shift into living as the master. The master is not someone without urges. The master is someone who knows they possess urges and knows where to allocate them, so they become fuel, not shackles. The most vital part of individuation is this: you accept that gloom is not the adversary. Gloom is unextracted treasure. Each time a dependency arises, it pulls you closer to that treasure, even if awkwardly. But now, instead of battling, you look directly at it. You see the message. You see the old terror. You see the injury that was once veiled.
And you begin learning to cherish that forsaken part. That love is not weakness. It is a restorative force. It is the flame that liquefies the raw metal of urge and converts it into the gold of self-insight, exactly as Jung linked psychological transformation with alchemy. You will observe that individuation does not progress in massive leaps. It progresses in very tiny moments. The instance you pause before doing something detrimental. The instance you select to sit and inhale instead of plunging into the old reaction. The instance you articulate the truth to yourself, even if only in a solitary sentence. These small instances aggregate into a grand transformation, and then a subtle shift transpires.
You no longer inquire, how do I flee addiction? Instead, you begin inquiring, who am I becoming through this expedition? This is the shift Jung regarded as the turning point from retreating to advancing toward wholeness. And in that perpetual choosing, a more resilient, clearer, more authentic version of you begins to emerge. The expedition of individuation does not guarantee that you will become a better individual. It guarantees that you will become a truer one. And when you are truer, dependency loses the habitat it requires to survive. It returns to where it belongs, an old experience whose mission is fulfilled, something you can finally set down. Jung once remarked, "You are not what occurred to you. You are what you decide to become." And that is the core of individuation.
You are not your old routines. You are not your subconscious ceremonies. You are not the shadow you once disowned. You are the one deciding to enter the light. You are the one deciding to reconnect. You are the one deciding to stop retreating. Freedom does not surface when you destroy addiction. Freedom surfaces when you no longer require dependency to exist. Freedom in Jung's perspective is not a state of having no urges. Freedom is when you are clear enough to know what is moving within you and brave enough not to turn away from it. Dependency may once have been the location you hid, but from now on, it can also be the signpost conducting you home. Each time a craving appears, it is not just a threat. It is a reminder. It is time to decide differently.
Will you persist living as someone dragged through the gloom, or commence walking as the one carrying the torch through your own expedition? This time the reply does not reside in addiction. It resides in the next decision you make right after this video concludes.